Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's live webinar with the Ask the SCSA. Let's just go through a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you're joining us for the first time, this is a live webinar held every Tuesday and Thursday at noon. It is being recorded, and you will be able to see it later on YouTube. As well, you can also see this and other previous sessions on Facebook. You can also post your questions if you have any on Facebook, as well as the Q&A feature on this webinar. So today our presentation is going to be on concrete. But before we get into that, let's have our fellow panelists introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, I'm Justin, safety advisor in Regina, and my regions that I reach out to is Yorkton, Esterhazy, and then of course Regina.
Good afternoon, my name is Bill Gazelle. I'm an advisor here in Saskatoon, and I deal a lot with the region west of Saskatoon.
Hey everyone, it's Mike Moore. I'm from the Saskatoon office as well, and I take care of the Battleford, Lloydminster, and Meadow Lake area. So glad to be here today.
Thank you. And again, my name is Joanne Davis, and I am an advisor from the Regina office, and I do take care of the Moose Jaw Swift Current regions as well. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go through a quick presentation on concrete, some of the hazards associated with it, and then we're going to go into a discussion on different scenarios. So again, today we're going to discuss some hazards found when working with concrete. Again, a lot of times people are doing renovations and may come in contact with concrete even at home in their own projects, as well as our residential, commercial, and industrial construction sectors. So the first thing you want to talk about is, what is it? Concrete is made up of three basic components: water, aggregate, rock, sand, or gravel, and Portland cement. Cement is usually in powder form, and it acts as a binding agent when mixed with water and aggregates. This combination, or concrete mix, will be poured and hardened into a durable material, which we are all familiar with. You can also see here, there's also air admixtures, which we'll get into in a few slides. I want to talk a little bit more about the cement that is part of concrete. There's quite a few components to it, but I'm just going to deal mostly with lime, which can take up to 62 to 67%, depending on what you get, as well as silica, which is 17 to 25% components for cement powder. When it comes to lime, there's quite a few hazards associated with this. And you do want to consult with your SDS sheet as well when you're looking at your different components of your concrete. So worker safety for lime, particularly quicklime, is an alkaline material and reactive in the presence of moisture. Workers handling lime must be trained and wear proper protective equipment. There are quite a few eye hazards that can cause severe eye irritation or burning, and this could include permanent eye damage. Eye protection, including chemical goggles, safety glasses, or face shields, should be worn if there's a risk of lime exposure. Contact lenses are not suggested to be worn in the presence. Skin hazards is another one. Lime can cause irritation or burns to unprotected skin, especially in the presence of moisture. Prolonged contact with unprotected skin should be avoided. Protective gloves and clothing should cover arms and legs as well. And remember, lime does react with moisture, and it generates heat, capable of causing thermal burns. And there's also inhalation hazards as well. Lime dust, when it's dry, is irritating if inhaled. In most cases, dust masks should provide adequate protection. High exposure situations, you may want to look at increasing your respiratory protection. Again, consult your SDS sheet. So here, as you can see in the picture, eye damage, concrete burns, not covering your legs completely, inhalation, and first aid. You should be familiar with first aid requirements as well. So the next one here is silica. Silica dust can cause silicosis, a serious and irreversible lung disease. It could also cause lung cancer. Cutting, breaking, crushing, drilling, grinding, or blasting concrete or stone releasing the dust. As workers breathe in the dust, the silica settles into their lungs. For information on protecting your workers from harmful exposures to silica dust, you should also see the SDS sheet as well. It is the most common hazard on work sites. Any activity that creates dust can expose workers to airborne silica. The most common ways to create silica dust are as follows: chipping, sawing, grinding, hammering, drilling, like I said earlier, crushing, loading, hauling, dumping, building demolition, power cutting and dressing stones. You do have renovations, hydroblasting, dry sweeping, quite a few, excavating as well. So it's not just with concrete work that we do have silica risks. Symptoms are shortness of breath, loss of appetite, stenosis, severe cough, chest pains, fatigue, and fever. So now I just want to go quickly through the hierarchy of controls. We talked about a couple hazards. We'll get into them a little bit more. But when we're talking about ways to control those hazards, we always want to use elimination as being the most effective if possible. And then go to substitution. Then we're going to look at engineering controls, which isolate people from the hazards. Administration controls, this is the way people work. And last, PPE is going to be your last line of defense, and that's your personal protective equipment. So next thing I want to talk about quickly here is your concrete admixtures. I do believe here I'm going to talk about 7 quickly. There are a few more. With the new technology all the time, we're always finding better ways to improve our products. So the first one here is retarding admixtures. This slows the setting rate of concrete and is used to counteract the acceleration effects of hot weather on concrete setting. So you would include a retarder to keep concrete workable during its placement. Some of the additional hazards, again, are going to be very similar to concrete itself, with having that airborne dust, eye irritation, and skin irritation. Entrained admixtures. Some of the safety data sheets that I was looking at for these, you have eye damage and irritation, as well as serious eye damage, and skin sensitization are very high when it comes to these admixtures. Water reducing admixtures, again, do have eye damage and irritation, and serious eye damage and irritation. Could also cause allergic reactions and may damage organs such as respiratory system. Water reducing admixtures usually reduce the required amount of water content for concrete mixtures about 5 to 10%. And this will result in a higher strength. Accelerating admixtures increase the rate of early strength development, reducing the time required for proper curing. This also is used usually in cold weather. Some of the hazards associated with these admixtures, again, are going to be eye damage and irritation. Next one is shrinking reducing admixtures. They're added to concrete during the initial mixing. It's a type of admixture that could reduce early and long-term drying shrinkage. This one does have skin corrosion and irritability, skin and eye damage as well. Superplasticizers in your admixtures, or high range water reducers can reduce water content by 12 to 30% and can be added to concrete with a low to normal slump. They also come with added hazards of skin, corrosion and irritation, as well as eye. So a lot of these do have the same additional hazards. We also have corrosion-inhibiting admixtures. This one also has your eye and skin irritation as well as carcinogenicity. So I'm going to go over a view of some of the hazards associated with concrete. Potential hazards to concrete manufacturing workers include eyes, skin, respiratory tract irritation, exposure to cement dust. Inadequate safety guards on equipment, inadequate lockout tagout systems on machinery, overexertion and awkward postures, slip, trips and falls, and chemical burns from wet concrete. So that's just summing up a little bit of some of the hazards. So exposure to cement dust can irritate eyes, nose, throat, and upper respiratory system. Skin contact may result in moderate irritation and cracking of skin to severe skin damage from chemical burns. Silica exposure can lead to lung injuries, including silicosis and lung cancer. Some of the solutions for these are to rinse, if you're in contact, rinse your eyes with water. If they come in contact with cement dust, and consult a physician. Use soap and water to wash off dust to avoid skin damage. You want to wear a respirator to minimize inhalation of cement dust, and avoid eating and drinking on dust surfaces. You want to make sure your lunch area is clear. When it comes to wet concrete, it can result in skin irritation or even first, second, or third degree chemical burns. Compounds such as chromium may also be harmful. You do want to wear alkali resistant gloves, coveralls with long sleeves and full length pants, waterproof boots, and eye protection. Wash contaminated skin area with cold running water as soon as possible if it gets on you, and rinse eyes splash with wet concrete for at least 15 minutes. Again, you're going to refer to your SDS sheet for, if anything, specific. I want to talk a little bit about machinery on site. There's going to be a lot of different machinery depending on the concrete job that you're doing. They range from big to small. You want to make sure that you have spotters, you're keeping your work area clean with a clear line of travel, and make sure everybody is trained when dealing with this machinery and don't work underneath machinery either. And don't forget about power tools that we often use. Falling objects and slip, trips, and falls are also a real hazard when it comes to working with concrete. There's a lot of uneven ground that we're dealing with all the time, and depending on the situation, you may have people working above you as well. So you got to be aware of falling objects. Proper PPE, obviously planning your route and having a clear path would be very important. Ergonomics. Working with concrete is very physically demanding, and you can find yourself in awkward body positions for extended amount of time. Improper lifting, awkward postures, and repetitive motions can lead to sprains, strains, and other musculoskeletal disorders. Try to use hand trucks, forklifts when possible, lifting properly, getting co-worker to help, avoiding twisting while you're carrying, shifting your feet, taking small steps in the direction you want to turn. Again, try to keep floors clear and avoid tripping and slipping hazards. So again, proper training and procedures and practices in place are really key. I have a little bit of confined space. Understand that the concrete truck, if someone's going to clean it or it can't go in the truck, it is a confined space, as well as sometimes we are actually placing concrete in confined spaces. So you do need to follow your proper company procedures when it comes to that. When it comes to PPE, it is required construction sites. You do need to wear your hard hat. Again, there is falling objects, eye protection. We talked a lot about the hazards and how many eye hazards there are in the components of concrete. So you want to wear that. You want to wear the appropriate gloves for the job, depending on what stage you are, whether or not you're forming and whether or not you're placing concrete. Long pants, again, sometimes people wear a total coverall system as well. And you want to wear the appropriate safety boots. If you're working in wet concrete, you are going to need protection against corrosion. And a high-vis vest is always good too. This one doesn't have it, but there are often many times trucks on sites when it comes to concrete, unless it's a smaller job. I can't stress the importance of having spotters. The concrete truck drivers, usually very skilled, and I've done this many times. However, they may not know the environment, or there may be some uneven ground or soft spots that need to be assessed beforehand. And so really assessing all your hazards before having the concrete truck come in, and then having proper procedures and practices for spotters for them as well. Justin, you had something to add to this, I believe.
Yeah, I've poured thousands of meters of concrete, and I've worked in construction a long time. And like you said, the concrete drivers, they're very, very skilled. But drivers even slip on wet mud after a rain or in the spring or whatever, and they end up hitting the braces and kind of tearing the forms apart, or even worse for their own trucks, hitting pins, right? So having those spotters, I've seen trucks hit pins and it blows the tire. Steel pins that help hold the braces and the forms on, and it blows everything apart, right? And it doesn't even stop with the concrete trucks. You had mentioned power mobile equipment. I've done a lot of pours where the ground, it's not conducive to getting a truck in, and it's too far essentially to pump. So for smaller pours, we've just filled up the bucket of a Bobcat, and the Bobcat has an attachment that's got a spout on it that you can literally fill up with concrete and then drive it out to where you're pouring it and then just dump it in. Having everybody wearing their reflective vests is absolutely imperative, because you don't know what the environment's going to be until the day of the pour. And anybody that's poured concrete knows that it's pretty rare that a concrete pour goes really, really smooth, no matter, trucks are late or they're early, or it starts to rain, or it's too hot, it's too windy, or the slump's not right, or, all these things can happen. So the more you prepare with this, having everything ready, clean, backing up those drivers, and making sure the site's clean and ready for them, it just takes one thing off that list of things that can possibly go wrong during a pour.
Okay, thank you, Justin. So now we're going to get into the section of our webinar where we're going to bring up some pictures and we're going to discuss them and discuss some hazards associated, any relevant experience that the panelists can bring as well. You can share that. So I will share, and I'll stop the PowerPoint every now and then. Mike, I don't know if you have any tools or anything you want to show us down the line, but just let me know and I'll make sure to stop the PowerPoint as well.
So I'll just interject on this. This is such a great topic. I find for there's a lot of homeowners that want to do a garage pad or even a shed pad, or put some piles in for a deck they're going to be building. And a lot of times I find that whenever I'm not a journeyman carpenter, I'm not a professional concrete person or anything like that, but I've done a lot of concrete around my own, for my own doing in that. And I think a lot of people do that. What I've learned is that having someone with you that has experience in the trade and that can really help through the process, for one, you're going to get a way higher quality product, especially when it comes to finishing. But the other thing is you're going to be aware of some of these hazards. You're going to be aware of some of this stuff. It's so interesting. Justin was just talking about the idea that, being prepared before the pour. Well, a lot of times when I never knew this, but when I had my concrete guy, I would do a lot of the forming. He taught me how to form. He taught me how to do a lot of the rebarring and stuff. But I didn't realize that, like, these crews, these people in the concrete trade, 6 a.m. is pour time. Hey, like, a lot of times these trucks are getting dispatched first thing in the morning. It's because of that, the hot sun. It's because of the time of day and the complications that can go with the pour and stuff. It just gives you a way better timeline to do the project. Now, if you're not ready and you start getting concrete trucks that start showing up and you're not ready for them, and you haven't figured out how you're going to safely get the concrete, like Justice said, through the skid steer to the pour, or it rained the night before, there's a lot of planning to do. So I think a lot of times, you know, you may be at it, and I know I have been at 11 at night the day before the pour because I knew trucks were coming. And you got to sort out those things so that you don't get in the middle of it and just try to push through, because that's when you can have incidents happen, for sure.
That's right. Proper planning is going to be key.
Mm-hmm.
So the first picture here is just a driveway. Again, proper planning. You have a truck coming in. This is residential, is going to be important. Anybody want to add anything to this one?
I never really worked a lot of residential. I was mostly a commercial industrial guy. But the big thing I see as an advisor is traffic control plans. These are in developing areas where you've got lumber trucks running through, you've got sometimes people that already live in the neighborhood trying to park, and you're trying to bring a concrete truck in that's got to manipulate, because I mean, on this one's loading, offloading concrete from the front, but a lot of them offload from the back, and they back in and they block a lot of traffic. The angles they have to cut, there might be cars in the way, and those chutes can only be so long. You know, three chutes usually go together, 4 maximum. So if you want to really get up close in that pour, you got to make sure that neighbors know, that other builders around there know, hey, we're pouring concrete in 3 days. The night before, we're going to go out, we're going to lay out some pylons, whatever, to make sure that traffic control plan is set up. Because once concrete shows up, you know, everybody, you know, goes into what we like, you know, as hunters call it, sketch and buck fever, and people get sometimes crazy. And it takes, like Mike said, those experienced people around to really set the tone of the day. And that's, again, the last thing you want to be worried about is trying to get a neighbor to move their vehicle at 6 a.m. when they're still sleeping on a Saturday, and saying, hey man, do you mind moving your car? Sometimes to where, if the street's loaded, where are they going to move their car? Because you have a concrete truck coming in. So making sure not only the traffic control that day, but the night before, you have a plan set up and ready to go.
So cold joints between trucks, as you guys probably know, like Bill would know, or Justin, and if you end up having a truck and you place that concrete that comes, maybe it has maybe you still got another 2 trucks coming, and like you say, Justin, a car parks in your way and they walk away and you're not aware of this, what do? Like, how do you start wheelbarrowing from the street? And then how do you get into the formwork? You end up with a lot more hazards, and it just ends up extremely inconvenient, and it could end up in the quality of your product, could reflect drastically.
I think the biggest scenario that I see with this image, Joanne, is ergonomics. I've done a lot of meters of residential concrete, flat workplace finish stuff, and the strain on your back when you're screeding, also when you're floating and magging out certain areas, you're really reaching. You don't, unlike a lot of other areas where you can get a large float in and extendable handles, in certain situations in this, you're going to be, you know, stretching in ways and positions that your body isn't used to. And there is a lot of ergonomic strain. Also in this image here, I can see just forward of the fellow that's at the bottom of the driveway, it looks like there's a steel sidewalk pin that's being used to reinforce the end of that formwork. This I saw in a couple images as you're going through your PowerPoint as well too. We talk a lot about this scenario as it appears in fall protection and the use of you know, your protective caps and whatnot. People will go crazy protecting every piece of vertical rebar they can find on a job site. but they will absolutely not see the vertical steel pins sticking in the ground. And as Justin said, whether it's a truck driving over them and losing a tire, or whether it's the potential, you see a lot of uneven ground here, there's a lot of activity, people are moving around, and the potential and the chance that that person could trip on some uneven ground and land on that vertical steel pin, there's a major impalement hazard there that needs to be looked at. So I have a nice large scar on the side of my chest where I was pouring and ended up tripping off the slab basically and fell onto some wooden stakes that we were using at the time and just grazed one. But it gouged me pretty good across the rib cage. So having steel pins unprotected in formworks, as Justin said, in turnbuckles and bracing, right near your path of travel where you're walking, where vehicles are, where people are going to be moving, again, is something that needs to be looked at a little bit closer. It's not just rebar that has the potential and the risk of impalement. It is other items and pieces of equipment that are on that job site.
Yeah, Bill, I just stopped sharing the screen so we can see you a little bigger. Can you share that rebar protection item that you have there?
I absolutely can. Yeah. So I have a couple of different ones here as we talk about in the fall protection class, and I'll try to see if I can get the zoom going on those ones completely. So here we just have your normal scratch cap, plastic cap, not intended for impalement protection. They have you see them lots on a job site being used on vertical rebar. However, it's not the appropriate cap for the job. The reason why you see lots of them is because they're cost effective compared to when we look at your proper impalement protection caps. These ones here, which are not only larger in size, but also contain armor plating on the inside of them. So your normal square cap also contains steel plate on the top of it. This is a cutaway section to prevent that rebar from protruding through the standard plastic caps. And again, eliminating or reducing the potential of impalement injuries. But use of proper items to do that, there's lots of them out there. We have our plastic carny style caps, which can be used for long runs of rebar that are all at about the same height, placing material on the top here. But it is, again, what my biggest focus when I talk to people about this is getting away from the tunnel vision of rebar. They will go out of their way to cap every piece of rebar they can find on the job site, while doing so walking right past, as we saw in that image, the steel pins sticking out of the ground, which pose the exact same threat of impalement as the rebar does. And in some cases, even a greater risk because it's in the path of travel. It's where workers are going to be walking. So, yeah.
Hey, let's take this to the shop for a sec. I got some things here. I think there's, even with that residential concreting, I think people like to sometimes think, hey, like I'm on a industrial site or commercial site, but I'm just doing this residential driveway. The hazards can't be that bad. The concrete's probably not even harmful because it's just a residential driveway. Well, the concrete has whatever additives that were added in it. So a good a rubber glove to work with this stuff. I don't know if any of you guys have had concrete burns. I've had some irritation, but have had no actual serious burns. I do know people that have. Even a steel toe boot. That rebar, when we put rebar down into a short excavation for the formwork for the rebar, that when we tie that wire or that bar with some wire, and that wire, if it's sticking up, it'll go right through your shoe. It'll go right through your shoe and right into your foot. So if you don't have a proper steel toe boot while doing concrete, potentially you can end up with needing a tetanus shot, that kind of stuff. Such things as a wheelbarrow. Doing a residential driveway, there's going to be a lot of wheelbarrow work. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever wheelbarrowed something and had it fall over on you, especially a full wheelbarrow of concrete. But the amount of weight there, if that was to go over on the side of my leg or over onto my foot or something like that, I can do some serious damage. So this is a very important aspect of especially doing flat work is a wheelbarrow. A lot of times if you're not pumping it or you can't get your chute to reach. But this is really this thing full of concrete. I don't even know what it would weigh, a couple 100 pounds.
It's 400 pounds, Mike.
400 pounds is what a full
Roughly
wheelbarrow.
400 pounds, full to the top wheelbarrow.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that a lot of times you're getting them full, right? Like it's the guy running the chute that's dictating how much concrete goes in your barrel. So make sure you communicate, hey, like maybe give me half wheelbarrows. I know when I was doing it with my concrete guy, because he was used to doing concrete day in, day out, I wasn't. So running a wheelbarrow, 400 pounds of concrete was not cool for me. I had to fall over 1 or 2 times. So I said, hey, how about 3/4 wheelbarrows, right? And then once I got used to it, but back to what Bill was saying, with this repetitive strains that we could have, I wasn't used to running wheelbarrow. I wasn't used to being bent over all day. So those things, especially if you're not experienced, or especially if you're not used to those motions, even running a rake and pulling that concrete back and just helping that on a large driveway or something like that could really strain you. So the proper stretch and flex, stay loose, that kind of stuff can really help.
And this next one here, we're still doing a little bit of residential. And here we just talked about PPE a little bit. PPE would definitely be helpful. We're missing a few pieces. And not to mention that wearing shorts, right? We don't want those concrete burns. Obviously, it's not very deep, but you can get it splashed into your boot and be stuck against your skin. You want some protection there. You also have the bobcat sitting in the back. You have pieces of equipment. So if I'm not sure when they're going to be moving that later, but you want to make sure having some high vis too. So yeah, some more residential concerns on this one.
Yeah, a good steel-toed rubber boot is probably the right course of action for your feet. The idea of wearing safety glasses while doing concrete, I don't know if you guys ever got any concrete to the eyeball, but if it burns your skin, I can only imagine what it does to your eyeball.
I think the biggest
actually a good. Sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
No, I was just going to say, I think one of the big things that I can see with this one right off the bat is, as it's great that he's using the proper PPE, using some steel-toed rubber boots, but they look like the fit is completely wrong for him. Anytime that we were ever pouring, having a properly fitted pair of rubber boots, ones that your feet don't swim in, because you're dealing with trip hazards left, right, and center, the rebar that's suspended,
Yep.
All that kind of stuff. And it's difficult to maintain proper footing, to prevent a rolled ankle, to feel where the rebar is and make sure that you're not going to trip over backwards. He's focusing forward, and he's likely moving the chute side to side, possibly stepping backwards as the truck is moving backwards to completely fill that area. And a loose, poorly fitted pair of rubber boots, steel-toed or otherwise, for this situation will potentially lead to, you just don't have the same dexterity, you don't have the same feel wearing an incorrect pair of footwear, and it will lead to trips, slips, and falls, rolled ankles, and otherwise. So that's right off the bat, I see that, and I would question his selection of protective footwear. Better than a pair of running shoes or flip-flops, of course, but having those properly fitted rubber boots is very important in my mind.
Yeah, very true.
So I think here we can address, we've addressed PPE quite a bit, so it might be in a few more of the pictures coming up. But let's talk about some of the housekeeping and extra trip hazards that we're talking about here, and positioning of your chute and working with it. Yeah, what do you guys see?
Yeah, that's a big one. It's a good picture for that, Joanne. One of the worst things that I've ever found when doing concrete is, and sometimes it's really not, you can't avoid it because the area you're working in is just tiny, and you don't have much of an area to place all your rebar that you didn't use or wood piles or whatever. But get everything away. It looks like these guys actually are forming as they're, like, the concrete truck just showed up, and I don't know if they're planning on throwing in their rebar as they're going. Some guys do that. I've seen some people lay down a matting of concrete and then just throw their rebar, lay down 2 inches of concrete, then throw the rebar on top and pour over top of it because it's fast and it's not tied. And it's definitely not recommended to do it that way, but some people do. So it looks like these guys are just doing the job as they're going because the concrete truck's there, the form, it's not finished formed off, and there's no rebar in there. So, but having all that, the sledgehammers and the skill saws away from there, you get stuff full of concrete, and you just end up doing more work after washing everything. You already have enough tools to wash. And the other thing is, we talk a lot about with safety. is protecting not only workers, but protecting the other investments on site, like the home itself. So making sure that you've polyed off all the siding. And this brings up the point of even just having the safety glasses on while pouring concrete. You know, concrete splashes. And it's not even, I don't know, anybody that has experience with pouring walls and using a concrete vibrator, when you pull that thing out and it's still going, it splashes concrete everywhere. But just the idea of concrete coming out of the chute into the form, it splashes, it can get in your eyes, it can get all over tools and all over everything. And it really makes a big mess.
Well, we've seen the videos. I don't know if the Three Stooges or whoever made it famous of the whole stepping on a rake business, but that's the real deal. You step on the backside of a rake when it's just sitting there, and that thing comes up and just smacks you. So the placement of tools along the way too, not just in storage or while we're waiting, but every time you set something down, a rake or a pry bar or something like that, we got to be conscious of what we're doing and how we're setting it, because we could be setting up booby traps, because there is a lot going on when we're pouring.
Yeah.
Yeah, not myself, Mike. Oh, sorry, not myself, Mike, but I do know personally a friend who stepped on a rake while they were at work and it flipped up and just about broke their nose, gave them a black eye, a whole bunch of stuff because they were rushing. There was stuff going on. Stuff and tools were just thrown and strewn about, and somebody inadvertently stepped on a rake, a friend of mine, and yeah, gave him quite a surprise when it snapped up and smacked him in the face. So.
These aren't hypotheticals. This is the real deal, hey?
Yep. This picture here looks like we're doing some kind of, it could be a garage pad. And then we have a sloped section to it. So again, it looks like PPE does look fairly good from what we can see. And gloves and everything, and ergonomics is key. We do have a bystander, you can see, not wearing PPE beside on the end of the photo. It's important that they be made aware of the hazards as well. And another side note here, we talked about rebar, but also when doing these jobs, making sure that we have quality requirements. Rebar should be lifted. It needs to be in the proper position to be effective, right? This one's laying on the ground right now, so I'm not sure what the plan is with this one, but kind of making sure that when you're looking at a job or getting somebody to come in to do a job, that there are certain codes and requirements when it comes to the engineering processes, when it comes to concrete. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one here. Mike, you had already talked about this a little bit. Wheelbarrows, and we do use them quite a bit. We do see the running shoes or the other shoes there as well.
You know, this brings up a couple of points, especially when it comes to wheelbarrows. Every single time, and anybody that's worked in construction on pours, who gets the wheelbarrow? The new guy. The new guy gets the wheelbarrow, right? Always, because the reality is, in order to do concrete, you need a lot of experience. Even as an experienced person, I've lost some pours before that, you know, just didn't go my way, or forms blew open or whatever. So you have your most experienced people, you know, you climb the hypothetical ladder. You start on the wheelbarrow, or you're raking. And then from raking, you maybe get on the screed, and then you start doing things like the preliminary edging, and when you're just pushing rocks down, not the final finish, but the first form to get a feel for it. And as you work up, then you start getting into things like your power screeds and power trowels, depending on the size of the pours. But that first job is always that wheelbarrow. So it looks like they've done some actual groundwork on that bottom left one, where you can see the difference between the two, how they're entering the forms. The first one, they've used the rock that they've used as their base to build a little ramp that goes up onto the side of their form, and then they drop in, of course. You know, the wheelbarrow is going to have some bounce to it, which isn't it's not the safest thing. They may be putting a 2x8 or plywood in there to ramp down, and then drive over top of their wire mesh. But in a lot of areas, sometimes you're going to end up, in my commercial experience, you might be doing a little bit of wheelbarrowing. You might have a double or triple mat, and then you're using, you know, planks and stuff like that to kind of navigate your way across this pour. Bill was talking about the fit of rubber boots. When you have a double mat or triple mat and you got the new person in those floppy boots because they didn't know they had to have rubber boots. If someone gives them a pair of theirs, they're a size 10, they're wearing the 12s, and they're hauling they're going to fill up that wheelbarrow because for some reason they think it's funny to watch the new guy struggle with a 3/4 to full wheelbarrow full of concrete. And I know this because it happened to me. And then when they spill it over, everyone can have a great time laughing at the new guy. But there's a lot of injury that can come with this type of thing. So again, that pre-planning, you can see the difference between the two where they've got it dug out, and because of the elevation of the top of concrete to the current landscape, they don't want to have to fill too much back in. So they build a ramp over. In the bottom left, they've got a ramp that goes right over top of the form. You have to be ready for what type. Now, in this bottom left one, you can see they're using wire mesh. So they're going to pour a little, they're going to lift it up. They're going to pour a little, they're going to lift it up by hand. But all these things with PPE and the pre-planning and everything, you can really see on that bottom one, they've really done a really good job of making sure that they've set the site up for success when it comes to that concrete pour. But again, when using that wheelbarrow, it's really easy to let it get away on you and fill it up too high or get overzealous with the pour and get a little too much concrete in that wheelbarrow. And be nice to your new guys if you want them to stick around, because concrete's it's one of those jobs where it's not easy to convince people to help you with a pour. Mike, I'm sure that you had a couple of no's and a very few yeses when doing your work, because concrete is difficult. So be nice to the people on the wheelbarrows.
It is, and I'd like to touch on that whole concrete wheelbarrow thing too. I did some work at the lake, and I just put some sonotube in the ground. I wanted to put some piles in for I wanted to do kind of a lean-to for my quad or whatever, and so I put the sonotube in. I think it was an 8-inch sonotube or whatever, 4 of them, and I started mixing. I decided I was going to buy bags of pre-mixed concrete, and I was going to mix them in a wheelbarrow. I believe that was, and I've been doing construction since I was 18 years old. I went pipelining. So I've been through some things and done some work. And that was probably the worst day of work I ever had in my whole life. It must have been plus 20, 30 out, plus 20 to 30. It was just smoking hot. And I'm trying to mix like with a shovel in a wheelbarrow, where the time and money that the money I saved, I made up in time and effort. Like what I should have done, and what I would do is next time, is calculate how much concrete do I actually need for my project. There's lots of concrete calculators out there. You can use them right off the Google, and then see what it costs to get concrete delivered. Because here's a picture of concrete, and that's what I did. I ended up buying a concrete mixer because I found out that for a couple or a few $100, I can get my own concrete mixer, and then the pre-mixed bags is a lot better. But this whole idea of mixing a wheelbarrow with a shovel, worst day of my life. Just want to share that. Worst day, my whole life.
Well, Mike, there's a lot of companies that will do, like, because there's the larger companies that supply concrete, there's a minimum amount of concrete you have to order.
Yes.
But I've done a lot of jobs with friends and stuff where there's companies that do small batch, right? That if you only need 1 or 2 meters, it's not super cheap by any means, but they'll do a small batch. And again, you can rent these mixers and have the people at the rental store explain to you exactly how to use them, because there's a lot of dangers, as Joanne just brought up with this picture, with using these types of mixers. Again, people get crazy. They're like, they do 1 bag and they're like, well, that didn't really pour a whole lot, so I'm going to do 2 bags. And then they start overloading the mixer, and now they're trying to use the shovel while the mixer's running, and the shovel gets trapped. And there's a lot that can go wrong, even with a small piece of equipment like a mixer, right? It sure beats mixing it in a wheelbarrow, and we've all been there, but you still got to know there's some dangers that come with these concrete mixers, right?
For doing small pours, I have a friend that does block work, so he's a mason, and he has a pull behind his truck mixer. Loves it because he's mixing up mortar and getting ready to do his block walls and stuff. He's not pouring driveways, but he's done some pours using that, and he absolutely loves it. And I love mine. The problem is that if I'm not wearing a respirator or even a dust mask, and I'm taking wind into consideration so I can be upwind from that, and I start dumping bags of concrete, talk about silica dust in the face, a whole day of mixing concrete. Because again, back to the new guy or whatever, like Who mixes concrete? Not the finishers. The finishers are finishing concrete. So if you get some help, what my experience is, when I get help, they get all the good work and I do all the grunt work, right? It's kind of like, so having a respirator on hand for every homeowner or anyone that works in construction doing anything. If you're gonna be a concrete person for a day or mix your own concrete or whatever like that, an investment like this, it's not just good for that project, but honest to goodness, that the amount of dust you can inhale by doing some mixing for a full day is insane.
I think just on that previous picture you had, Joanne, not the one that was up, but the one before with the wheelbarrow sitting next to the pour getting ready for where nothing has been happening yet. That doesn't matter. I just wanted to, Justin was talking about on the commercial side, the lowest person, the newest person gets the job of the wheelbarrow. But on our residential side, when we were doing a lot of residential flat work, there was 4 of us. And so that means when you have a slab of that size, you have 2 wheelbarrows and everybody's running and everybody's working together. So one thing that I just wanted to talk about is not only the strain, but there is the exhaustion and the physical exhaustion strain that comes at that. Concrete's on the ground. People are running around. There's things that need to be done. You're moving. More often than not, I have on different occasions double barreled. So you bring an empty barrel to the truck, they fill it, you take the full one, you dump it, you come back, you drop off the empty one, you pick up the full one, you dump it, and you're running. Because you want it on the ground as quickly as possible. The temperature's getting up, you need to get this stuff placed, you need to get it sitting on the ground, and you have no time to waste. And not bragging about moving towards exhaustion, but there have been points in both commercial and residential work that I've done where, once you're at that last wheelbarrow, you have trouble remembering your name. It's hot, you're dizzy, you've been doing a workout that would make CrossFit look like preschool, and you're running your brains out, and all of a sudden you notice that you haven't drank any water, you haven't taken a break, you're short of breath, you're dizzy, your heat exhaustion is starting to kick in. Just in those situations, it's something else to remember is try to bring enough help. As Mike said, having extra people, or as Justin said, you need to plan ahead for those type of things. Yes, 2 people could put that slab down, but 2 people are going to work themselves near to death to place it. The finishing part is fine. It's a lot of waiting, and in between hits, you're waiting, and it's all good. But that hour and a half while you're placing, it's a rush. You're moving, and on small crews, when you don't plan properly to have enough help, even somebody just raking, if you're trying to wheelbarrow and rake and then stop and screed and wheelbarrow some more and rake because you think 2 people can take on a slab of that size, there's a lot of effort there. That physical exhaustion, I think, is a big thing to look out for in those situations.
Yes, for
water.
sure. Yeah. This one was just to show ergonomics again. Even in the finishing, you can be, if you're doing a long sidewalk, like you're going to be down hunched over for a while, changing positions, changing your role, switching out with somebody, avoiding that overexertion again is really good.
The one thing I want to make note of, you can see quite clearly in this one, the concrete pin, not talking about impalement, but that concrete pin that's just below the guy that's putting in the expansion joints in the center. If you look at the top of it, it is heavily mushroomed out. Steel sidewalk pins that have been smashed with a sledgehammer over and over and over again get mushroomed at the top, and then those mushroom tops start to break apart. And the next time that you have a glancing blow or a mislaid strike or even a solid strike with a sledgehammer, those little chunks of hardened steel or soft or whatever mild steel on those pins will break off of there and fly out at extreme speeds. We used to have stories, passed around the lunchroom table about a worker who was putting in pins with a sledgehammer, and one of those shot off of there at such a velocity, went through his pants and ended up embedding itself into his leg and nicked one of the arteries in his leg from a mushroom steel sidewalk pin. So one of the last jobs I was on, we were doing a lot of concrete. One of the tasks we had the laborers do was to go and cut the ends off those pins so that you got a nice flat starting point again, and making sure that we've eliminated that potential hazard of high velocity projectiles coming off of those steel sidewalk pins.
Really good, Bill. I've worked in numerous places where that's a high topic of conversation. At least once a year, they bring it out as a safety topic, or a very make everyone aware of that mushrooming top on chisels, on anything, because it does. Like, I don't personally know anyone that's been hurt by that mushroom top shooting off, but
Yeah.
by the emphasis of companies and by the injuries that have happened out there, even though I haven't seen them, it's real. It happens.
Yeah.
I just want to speak about rebar for a sec. I got my cutoff saw here. So it's got a 14-inch blade on it. This cutoff saw like this, like you say, you got the laborers to start cutting the ends off those pins and stuff. Do you guys think there's a need for training on something like this? Just a saw? Like, what could happen? Hey? Something like this, if there's a burr on every end when you cut this rebar, there's always going to be a burr on the end. And that burr is a pain in the butt because you can cut your arm with it. You can cut all there. A lot of people use the side blade on here to do it. They thin that blade out. And then, as we all know, again, abrasive blades, when they're thinned out, when you misuse them, when they're used improperly, or even because of a manufacturer defect, they can explode. And I've actually seen where pictures of it, where a piece of that blade actually has been embedded in a face shield. So can you imagine if I'm just using a safety glass, even with this, say, oh yeah, no, I'm protecting the eyes. But are you protecting the face? Are you protecting the other areas too? Because if that blade blows up because of improper use, or because you want to take that burr off at the side of the blade, or you want to sharpen that blade up by banging on it or hitting on it and stuff, if this blade is compromised and it does explode on you, or maybe you were just transporting it, someone dropped it and it cracked that blade, and that blade blows up, man, I do not want that thing going through. So what you do is you wear, obviously not any headphones, but you'll wear safety glasses in combination with a face shield on a piece of equipment like this, and then proper use, obviously, and knowing some of the hazards related. This is a good example of a piece of equipment, just a standard piece of equipment that anyone is pretty natural for someone to figure out how to use this thing. But if they're not trained in the hazards related to this, or just not aware of those things, man, they can get themselves into some big danger.
One other point with those flying projectiles, we haven't seen any pictures yet of people I'm in, maybe it's coming up, but stripping the formwork. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, when you strike two hammerheads together, say you have one and you're trying to drive another one down, it will, whether that is mushroomed out or not, it has the very, very real potential of taking a chunk of the side of that hammer off and having that two pieces of hardened steel fly out at extreme velocities. I was shaping a piece of steel with a hammer, and underneath I had another hammer, and I was trying to flatten it out, and one of the chunks flew off and clipped me in the knuckle to the point of stitches. Just from doing a couple of taps, hammer on hammer with a piece of steel in between, trying to shape a piece of metal. So, oh, here we go. Joanne's got a lovely picture of stripping formwork. Very timely, but yes, striking two hammers together, incredibly dangerous. Taking two claw hammers and using one claw hammer to beat the other claw down into the formwork for stripping it apart, you're asking for a chunk of hardened steel to come flying off that hammer at high velocity.
That's really interesting, Bill. And even swinging a hammer. So I was doing concrete. One of my first projects here, I had the same concrete guy, fantastic friend of mine to do with the concrete with. He was showing me how to do some form work and stuff, and he was getting me to hold pins for him. So I'm holding a pin that's probably, I don't even know, 2-3 feet long. And then I have to hold this as a piece of plywood or OSB, obviously, but you have to hold this, and he is swinging a sledgehammer with all of his might as I'm holding this. One of the scariest situations in my life. You know the trust you have to have in someone to hold a pin while they swing a sledgehammer at your arm. A lot of times there's better ways, and what I found is the better way is, how about you hold your own dang pin and get it started and nail it. But this piece of equipment, if we're not aware of what's going on, like you said, Bill, I had no idea even about hardened steel and the ability for that stuff to shatter and come projectiles. But just the swinging of a hammer on pins, if we just think we're going to go along, there's a lot of hazards involved with that. So you should be aware of that.
I'm glad you brought that up, Mike. I was going to bring this up earlier, but not then. It's a perfect segue to it. I was working on a job where that exact thing happened, and what ended up happening was the person ended up hitting the pin, but then the sledgehammer, because the pin was on a slight angle, deflected off and smoked her finger. And what ended up happening is it actually blew up the worker's finger. And what we had tried to do previously, this was just the classic case of workers not wanting to go back to the CCAN to grab the tools that they needed. But one of the things that I had implemented when working with these pins is to just use a it's not coming to me. A pipe wrench. Sorry, using a pipe wrench. A pipe wrench is great for pulling pins, and it's great for setting pins because you can set the pipe wrench. It'll hold the pin for you. Now you're, depending on the size of pipe wrench, 14, 18, 24 inches away. A 24-inch pipe wrench might be a little heavy, but even being 18 inches away helps. And the other thing that we've done was actually built a pin holder out of a chunk of 2x4 and then a piece of plywood. That's one nail holding it on. So you actually put it on, there's a V cut on the 2x4, and the plywood just wraps around on the single nail and holds the pin where it is. So you have one person holding the pin, and the other person can slam it in, because when the ground's really hard, you can try using a hammer drill to drill yourself a pilot hole first, but that pin's got to be hit in real hard. Like when the ground's frozen, anybody that's done it knows and watches that pin, and you're just getting frustrated and more frustrated because that pin is just jumping. And you got to really strike it hard. So that's when that pipe wrench comes in, because if they miss, they might still hit the pipe wrench and knock the pipe wrench out of your hand, but at least it's not sledgehammer on skin, right?
Yeah, that's a really great point, Justin. We have a couple minutes left, I do believe, to the hour's almost up. So I did bring up this one last photo on your power trowel. If you have any comments on that before we wrap things up.
So just quickly, just in case someone else has something to jump in on, the picture on the left, one of my concrete friends, what happened is that he was power trowel in a basement. So you got enclosed area, you got a gasoline engine running, and he said one time he was in the basement, and I don't know whether it was winter or what was going on, but he didn't have proper ventilation set up. Took a shortcut and just thought, oh yeah, I just got this bit to do, I'll just power trowel it, no big deal. Crawled out of the basement, almost didn't make it out of the basement because of his exposure to bad air. Gasoline engines in enclosed spaces can really displace oxygen.
I know even with the use of scrubbers on the exhaust systems, that you still have the buildup of gases. So proper ventilation in the basements is a big deal. I've spent many days sitting in a basement and power troweling and then turning on fans and making sure that you have proper ventilation, and then closing everything up and letting the heat build up and then redoing that all. You have to plan ahead for those type of things. If you just show up, as you said, everything with pre-planning, that seems to be a good message for today, is having the proper plan in place, identifying those hazards ahead of time, and doing a reasonable hazard assessment before you go on to those tasks. Making sure you have the right equipment. So you have air moving equipment, you have scrubbers on your power trowels. A couple of the other issues with that picture that I've encountered in the past, when you first start up, if you've gone ahead and you've done your first hit with the floats and you're coming back in, sticking and stuff like that, you got to be prepared and competent to operate a power trowel. The first time I ever used one was, of course, working with not in a occupation, more on a farm build kind of thing, and I thought, oh, how hard can it be? Unless you've had a little bit of experience on them, it's quite difficult to understand the motion and how to work it properly and how to make it move and how to have it not fling you from side to side and stuff. So there is a steep learning curve with them that requires a high level of competency before you decide that you're going to go to Home Depot
Thanks, Bill. That actually brings us up to our hour here. Thanks again to our panelists for joining us. Don't forget to join us on Tuesday. We're going to finish up that audit tool. We have the supplementary Saskatchewan sections to review on Tuesday, and you can submit your questions at that time. Okay, thank you again, and we'll see you next week.